Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. I'd like us to give people who are joining maybe 2 more minutes or 3 more minutes, and then we can start. I think when we get to about 20, we can start. I think we have a quorum now. As we let everyone else join in, we can begin the session. Again, hello, guys. My name is Joy Mugambi. I lead the product marketing team for our corporate customers here at Moringa. I'd like to welcome you all to this session. And before we begin, I think it's nice to set the meeting expectations. This is an online meeting, so we hope that you only switch on your video when you're speaking, and then feel free to ask questions in the chat box. And mute yourself when you're not speaking. And then obviously be very present in this session. It's a learning session. Be critical, be curious, and ask as many questions as possible. Now that we've set today's session expectation, I'd like us to do a fun icebreaker just to get to know you guys and see the kind of knowledge you have around data protection. So we're going to play a game called Two Truths and One Lie. So out of the statements I'm sharing on the screen right now, one is a lie and two are truths. So feel free to give me the guesses on the chat box. So the first one is a strong password should be at least 8 characters long. Incognito mode keeps your browsing 100% private. Then phishing attacks are responsible for over 90% of cyber breaches. Which is the lie? Any guesses? Any guesses on the chat box? I can see someone is saying number 1 and 3 are true. Number 2 is the lie. Thank you, Doris. Option 2 is a lie. Option 2 is a lie. Jacqueline says number 1 is a lie. Sean Paul, number 2 is a lie. 1 and 2 are 3. Yes. If you guessed number 2 is the lie, you are correct. Incognito mode only hides your history, but it doesn't hide your website activity. So we'll move on to the next icebreaker. Two truths, one lie. First statement, a photo you delete from social media is removed from the internet instantly. Hackers can use public available social media information to answer your security questions. Your smartphone microphone could be listening to your conversations for targeted ads. Which is the lie? I'd like to see you guys engage me on the chat box. Mugeha Jacqueline says number 1 is the lie. Monica Davis, Jerry. Keep guessing, guys. Faith. I can see Steve. Okay. So the correct answer is number 1. Number 1 is the lie. If you delete your images from social media, they're not entirely removed from the internet because they can exist in other forms like archives, screenshots, or even backups. So we'll go to the third one, which is the truth and which is the lie. Some hackers are legally employed by companies to test their security. If you receive an email saying your account has been hacked, clicking the link to check is the safest option. Ransomware attacks can lock an entire company's file until a payment is made. Which is the lie? And which are the truth? One just says number 2 is the lie. Bradley says number 2. No one thinks any of the other options is true. Is the lie. Jerry says number 2 is the lie. I want to see more engagement, guys. You're 36 on the call. Gashugu says number 2. You're right. So number 2 is the lie. When you click links that are sent on your email and you're not sure about them, that is the quickest way or fastest way to get hacked. Thanks for engaging with me on the icebreaker. So I'll proceed to share the agenda. So for today's session, we'll just have a brief overview of what Moringa School is for those of you who have never interacted with us before. And then we'll just go straight into the webinar, which will be hosted by Amit. I'll let Amit introduce himself once we go through what Moringa is about. So welcome again to anyone joining at the moment. Moringa is a learning institution that is focused on market-driven education. So this is both for working professionals and aspiring working professionals. So we train in technical and professional tech-based programs such as software engineering, data science, cybersecurity, and much more. For our corporate clients, we also do offer custom-made program in tech based on their needs. So we started in 2014. Our founder is called Audrey Cheng, and we started with just 4 students, and we've reached over 8,000 graduates so far. So we've partnered with Flatiron for our software engineering, data science, cybersecurity, and more programs. And we've also partnered with industry experts for other programs like the data protection program that we have. So in the corporate side of our business, we train employees from various industries in tech-related courses. So far we've trained around 570 employees with over 10 programs that are custom made to their needs. We have 63% employees that say that their career progression, at least for the 12 months post training with us, has been great. So why study at Moringa? For some of you who are new here, we offer market-driven programs that are practical and project-based. There's an existing community. We have an existing Moringa community where you get to network, and learn from each other, and also network across the industry. We also do offer technical or industry expert support throughout our programs. And as a result of that, you're able to be career ready in whatever field that you choose to study with us. So our graduates have about 85% employment rate. This is for the ones who enter Moringa as not working professionals. So they're not seeking to upskill, they just want to learn skills from scratch. Over 1,000 companies have partnered with us, and we have over 1,000 partnerships where our graduates leverage from. So these are some of the organizations where our graduates work. And with that, I'd like not to take so much time so that we can welcome Amit, and he can take us through. No, before we welcome Amit, I'd like to take us through the course overview, for data protection. So I think we are all aware that the purpose of this webinar is to train us a bit on data security, especially in the organizational setup and also in our personal data. And as a result, we also do have a program or a course called Certified Data Protection Officer Program. It is a 4-week course, and the curriculum has been designed by Moringa alongside Amit. Amit is the facilitator for this webinar. So this 4-week program, you're able to understand data privacy laws and compliance. You'll also be able to master data protection and breach management. You'll also gain industry recognized expertise in data governance and help organizations or businesses where you work, or even as a consultant, to comply with these laws. So why should you learn this program at Moringa? Again, Amit is an industry, I'll let him introduce himself, but he's a seasoned industry expert in data protection. So you'll have industry expert-led sessions, which are self-paced. So you'll be able to read for yourself. You'll be able to have access to, a 2-hour live workshop every Thursday with Amit. And the curriculum is very comprehensive and up to date with the industry standards for data protection. So with that, I'd like to also highlight some of the prerequisites, for this course. You just need to have basic computer skills. Are you able to open your laptop, log in? And I can see most of you have done that or are using their phones. So you have to have basic computer skills, have some proficiency in English, both spoken and written, because the program is facilitated in English. You must have a computer and access to internet. You must also be able to study online throughout the program, because it is a virtual program. Then you should be available to attend the classes for the 4 weeks period. So the next intake for our data protection course is on 3rd March 2025. It is a part-time online evening course. You'll be able to study part-time and in the evening from Monday to Thursday, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. East African time. And the tuition fee for this program is 52,000. So how do you apply? You just log into Moringa School website, you navigate to the corporate section under courses, and you'll find the Certified Data Protection Program. So apply, and then you'll be able to confirm your details with our admission team, who will take up now. We'll give you either a phone call or an email to tell you the status of your application. And if you've been accepted, you'll receive payment details and proceed to pay before start of the class. So for this particular program, it is a 4 weeks program. So we require upfront fee payment for you to join the program. And it is on a first come, first serve basis. So with that, I'd like to welcome you once again. For those joining us, karibu sana for this session. So I'll let Amit introduce himself, and then he'll take us through today's webinar, which is practical strategies for ensuring data security through, safeguarding personal and organizational data. So without further ado, Amit.
Thank you, Joy. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. My name is Amit Gadhia. I'll just share my screen. Joy, if you may allow me just to share my screen. Yeah, okay, let me just share my screen.
Go ahead, Amit.
Thank you. So I hope you can all see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Lovely, thank
Thumbs
you.
up if you can, and use the chat box to ask any questions. We have a team in place that will respond to you, and then we'll have a Q&A towards the end where you can ask questions directly to Amit. So Amit, press.
Thank you. So yes, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, before we start this webinar, tell me something. Why do you think your personal data is important? Why should we really care about personal data? What's the reason why we are here today for ensuring strategies to ensure data security from a data protection perspective? I mean, you can put your answers in the chat. Anyone? Why is it important to secure personal data? Good. For privacy and to prevent oneself from falling victim to personal data misuse. Yes. So security can be used for identity theft. Yes. That's correct. But there is a fundamental reason why it's important. Yes, I do agree. It is for security, online protection, identity theft. These are the new things which have come up. But if you ask your grandparents or even your parents, because data protection is fairly new, why is data protection important? I mean, at the time of our grandparents or parents, the issue of identity theft or online protection, I think those things were never there because there was no internet, there was no mobile, right? Compliance, yes, because it's the law, it can be used for malicious. Yeah, okay, so all of you are right. But fundamentally, data protection stems from human rights. And though data protection is supposedly a new space, but it stems all the way that the first traces of data, personal data protection, and the right to be left alone, the right to privacy, comes the right to be left alone. It can be traced all the way to two American scholars in 1889. More importantly, the data protection and right to privacy came more into prominence after World War II, in that the atrocities which are committed during World War II, a lot of them were committed by the Nazi regime at that time, when they traced who were actually people, the minorities, the religious ethnic population, from the data which they were segregated and then eventually persecuted. So it spans all the way from 1945. More importantly, for us, those who are in Kenya, we are actually lucky to have data protection as a fundamental constitutional right. From the constitution when it was promulgated in 2010. So Article 31 C and D of the Constitution of Kenya gives you the right to privacy, as which I'll see shortly. So now let's go straight into the business of the day. So today, what we are going to be covering: what is data security in the concept of data protection, and the objectives are to understand key data security principles, explore what are the practical strategies to align safeguard data and align security practices with data protection regulations. So those are the objectives. To tell you a little bit more about just myself, to introduce, I am a lawyer both in Kenya and in the UK. For purposes of this webinar, I'm also a certified global privacy officer, a visiting fellow of Maastricht University, a certified AI governance professional from the International Association of Privacy Professionals, and certified information privacy professional Europe. And I've got certain other privacy qualifications as well. So that's more about myself. We need to recap for those of you who've already done a lot of data protection work. You probably know this, but it is good to have a recap. So I already alluded to it earlier that our right to privacy stems all the way from Article 31C and D of the Constitution of Kenya, all the way back in 2010. And then the Kenya Data Protection Act is just over 5 years old. It came into effect in 2019, specifically in November 2019. And then the regulations came into force in 2021. So this was the general regulations, the registration of the controllers and processors regulations, and then the compliance and enforcement regulations. Now, what is also important for you to note is that data protection just does not apply to you if you are a citizen of Kenya. It also applies to you if you are located within Kenya. So, for example, if you are a citizen of US or say of Japan, and you are based in Kenya, you are actually protected under the Kenya Data Protection Act, but solely by the fact that you are actually located in Kenya. So it is location based. And secondly, more if say for example you're a company, you're based say in China or you're based in India, just as an example, and you process personal data, say for example you provide cloud services. For those of you who know what cloud services are, so where you can store and process data based, say for example you're based in India, China, and you are then giving processing personal data of those who are located in Kenya. Data protection also applies to you even though you may be based in China or in India, right? So that is important. There are certain exemptions whereby if you are processing personal data for purely household purposes. So say, for example, myself and Joy, we are friends on, say, it's the social media platforms, for example, Facebook. And we then decide to take a photograph, a selfie, and then we post it on Facebook. That is purely for personal purposes. It does not apply, data protection, okay? There are also the certain exemptions, like, for example, for national security, Data Protection Act does not apply. However, say for example, if you are using that personal data for commercial purposes, it obviously applies. So these are some of the basics of data protection. And what is more and most important, especially when it comes to security, and for those of you who are techies, you are developing websites, you are developing applications, any other form of technology where we are going to be having data protection, sorry, personal data to be fed in. The first and foremost aspect you need to understand is privacy by design and default, which I'll see shortly. And that means that you also have to abide by the principles of data protection. That is most important. There are 7 principles of data protection, which must be at the forefront of any application you develop or any security features you develop in your applications. So the first one will be the right to privacy of the data subject. This is an overarching principle whereby it ensures that the data subject's personal information is handled securely and only for legitimate purposes respecting their privacy rights, number one. Secondly, then the second principle of lawful fairness and transparency This is a universal principle, is that whenever you're processing personal data, you must do it lawfully, fairly, and transparently. These three words are very easily said than done, especially the fairness element is normally not brought too much in the forefront, but then to be fair and transparent at the same time, it is very difficult. And we will not go into it too much at the moment, but you must make sure that you are processing data legally, ethically, openly with individuals, and they're fully informed about the personal data you're using. The second part is the third part is purpose limitation. Whenever you're processing personal data, it must only be collected for a specific, explicit, and a legitimate purpose. So, for example, if you are developing an application by, say, for purposes of recruitment tool, you cannot simply say that we are using it for our business. You must say that it is for purposes of recruiting employees or job applicants. The purpose must be very specific, and it must be explicit and legitimate, right? Now, legitimacy depends from case to case. Of course, legitimacy depends if you're based in certain countries where, say, it is legitimate, say, for example, to what example can I give? Say, for example, if it is legitimate and lawful to smoke, say, smoke certain substances, right? For example, in certain countries, smoking various substances is legal, right? But in our country, it isn't in Kenya. So, for example, you have to assess the legitimacy in accordance to the jurisdiction. Data minimization, this is a very key area. And I always, whenever I sign up for webinars, I sign up for events, sometimes I find that sometimes a lot of the data which is requested might be excessive. So for example, you must only collect data which is necessary and specified for the purpose. So whenever you say, for example, you are applying for a job, for employment, you should make sure that the data which the organization is collecting has to be minimum only for purposes of shortlisting you in the first instance. So what's the purpose of asking a job applicant what's the NHIF number, NSSF number, a detail number, and so forth, when they've not even been shortlisted to become to go to the next stage. And then there is explanation for family details. The personal data about family members should be limited to what is strictly necessary and must respect the privacy and consent. And then you must collect data which is accurate, and you cannot then keep data forever. So there is storage limitation, right? So you need to understand that whenever you are developing security features, first and foremost, are we abiding by the security, the principles of data protection. Thereafter, you must have a lawful basis for processing personal data. So the first and foremost is there are 8 lawful bases. Well, this one no, they have stated, we can see here there are 7, but there's also one more which is consent. My apologies, it has been cut off on this slide. So first and foremost, contract, legal obligation, vital interest, public authority, public nature, public interest, legitimate interest, historical, statistical, journalistic literature, and art or scientific research. And there we have the consent, which is there right at the bottom. Right, now, there is a misconception that for processing personal data, you need consent, which is not correct. Consent is only one of the lawful bases for processing personal data. So for example, the other lawful bases are contract. So say, for example, you then sign up with Moringa School for the DPO course, and then you give your name, phone number, and other details for purposes of the course, and then you make payment for it. The likely lawful basis, the most likely lawful basis will be contract. They don't need your consent for processing personal data. Legal obligation, I think that's fairly straightforward. So, for example, if you need if there is the legal obligation. So, for example, if a statutory obligation to give government any information, so say for KRA purposes, you need to give them your tax details, or you need an employer needs to share the NHIF and SSF details. It's a legal obligation, so you must they must adhere to that legal obligation. Vital interest is also only in emergencies. It only applies in life and death situations. Public authority is mainly for government organizations. Public interest, public nature is, are you discharging a public interest or public nature function? Legitimate interest, the lawful basis, is more or less like in whose interest is it? Is it in the interest of the organization? So, for example, again, if you if you sign up for Moringa's DPO course, it would be in the legitimate interest to make sure they also share your details with any other provider if they are going to provide you with any services which are related to that course, right? And then the historical, statistical, journalistic literature, art, scientific research. That is fairly self-explanatory, and then there is consent. You might ask, why have I put consent right at the bottom? Why? Because I would like to get rid of the misconception is that the consent is not the only lawful basis for processing. You only, under the law, you only need consent explicitly for two purposes. One is if you are going to be using personal data for commercial purposes, or if you are going to be using any children's data. And so these are the two main explicit areas stated in the law where you need consent. Other than that, you do not need consent. You can actually use other lawful bases. However, remember that once you decide on a lawful basis for processing, and if you do wish to then use that personal data for any other purpose apart from the original initial purpose, then most likely you will need consent for processing personal data. I know I can see there are some questions regarding lawful basis, but we are going to be dealing with this during Q&A. So please save your questions. By all means, keep on typing your questions on the chat. So we will now move to some examples. I've already given you some examples of lawful basis for processing. So for example, you have a contract where bank processes customers' personal information to manage the savings account. Legal obligation, I've already informed this. For example, hotel may wish to share the income details, the tax ID numbers with the KRA. Vital interest, where a hospital collects and uses patients' emergency contact details to notify them of next of kin in a life-threatening situation. Legitimate interest. So, for example, if you purchase something from a supermarket, they would like to deliver that. If it's a large appliance, they need to share your personal data, your property details for purposes of delivering, right? Your appliance. So that is legitimate interest. And then public interest, public nature, where a school may share anonymized or de-identified students' performance data with the Education Ministry to support national education policy, and then consent. So this is how far we are going to be going at the moment, just discussing the lawful basis. And then you also have rights. So you, me, your spouses, your partners, your children, you have rights under the Data Protection Act. So essentially, you have 8 different rights. Some of them are overlapping. And then the last one is actually a prohibition. We are not going to go too much into detail of the rights at the moment, because the purpose of this webinar is mainly to do with data security and data protection. But what you need to know is every individual's data subjects has the right to be informed, right to access their personal data, right to restrict how their personal data is going to be used, the right to object to the personal data, a right to rectify their personal data, a right of erasure, a right of data portability, a right not to be subjected to automated decision making. All these rights are not absolute. They are all conditional. So, for example, if it's going to be infringing anybody else's rights, if it is against the law, if it's by the law or if it's required by contract, then you need to you may not be able to exercise these rights. But generally speaking, these are the rights under the Data Protection Act, which you should keep in the forefront. I mean, once if you join the DPO course, we go a lot, much more deeper into these rights of the data subjects. But of course, in this session of 1 hour, we cannot explain to you all the rights and all the conditions which are applicable. So now let's move on to the practical strategies, which is a crux of this webinar for ensuring data security from a data protection perspective. I can already see there is a answer there. Then why do you need to maintain protect personal data? So key principles of data security: yes, confidentiality, ensuring only authorized access, integrity, and availability. For those of you who are from a technical background, you probably know what this means. But confidentiality essentially is about maintaining that only authorized individuals have access to data or sensitive personal data. Integrity is preventing unauthorized modification of the data, and availability is to ensure that the data is accessible when needed, preventing disruptions. These principles actually form the foundation stone of the best practices. So whoever gave that answer, yes, you're right, that you need to make sure that these are the principles of the foundation stones of data protection practices. Next, so what are some of the practical strategies for ensuring data security? So what are the common security threats? So one, cybersecurity threats, as Joy already mentioned. So these are phishing, malware, ransomware. So phishing, of course, many of you may know that these are email tricks whereby the tricking users to revealing sensitive information. Malware and ransomware where attackers encrypt data and demand ransom. Then you also have insider threats. So insider threats, most employees, and this is statistically proven, where employees are statistically 97%, or at least over 90% of causes for causing data breaches. Then there's data breaches where there's unauthorized access or leading to data leaks, and third-party risks. So vendors or service providers mishandling data. Under the Kenya Data Protection Act, you are required that if you are going to be sharing personal data with any third parties or vendors, you need to ensure that you have actually vetted those vendors, they are compliant, they have the data protection policies, procedures, data breach notification, consent mechanisms in place before you share personal data with them. So this is from a perspective of common data security threats. Next, we will move on to what are some of the strategies. In many organizations, I've seen that a lot of the departments, for example, marketing, finance, operations, they have access to all the data. So what is important from a data protection perspective is that not only should you have access to data you should protect data from outsiders or outside organization, but even internally, who has access to the personal data is important. So you should have a role-based access control. So employees should only have access to the data which they absolutely need. That is one of the securities, the securities you can implement, and it is very easy to implement from an IT perspective that you make sure not everybody has access to all the data. Then least privilege principle, which is, for example, granting only minimum access required for a particular task. Multi-factor authentication, I think this is a low-hanging fruit, whereby most organizations do not have some of the basic multi-factor authentications. Some of these organizations, for example, the banks, they can now you can see they've got OTPs in place, whereby before you log into your bank details, you're sent an OTP. OTP, for those of you who are not aware, is one-time password, whereby you have to enter that password. This is before you can log into your your bank account. Then regularly accessing reviews, so periodically checking and revoking unnecessary access, especially for the employees who may have left your employment. Moving on, the next one is, for example, data encryption to make sure that data address and the data in transit is encrypted. So data in transit and data at rest are also terms which are used in the Data Protection Act. We are not going to go through it at the moment. But data at rest essentially is where is the data finally stored. And data in transit are or emails or your file transfers. So you must make sure that all the data is a secure pipeline. And then if the data is wherever it is stored on the cloud, at the end of the pipeline, wherever it is stored, you must make sure that whoever is storing the data on your behalf does not have access to it. So it must be encrypted. Then you use strong passwords and encourage paraphrases, or passphrases. And then you use secure USBs or portable devices, and you encourage the use of encrypted flash drives. Next one, we will go on to say, for example, secure data storage backups. So, for example, if you are going to be using cloud services, you make sure you use trusted providers with strong security measures. But always make sure that you must make sure that your data, even if it's stored on a cloud, you must have automatically encrypted backups. Then off-site storage, keep copies in a separate location for disaster recovery. Test recovery plans, backup. A backup is useless if it cannot be restored quickly. For example, a law firm which loses case files when a cyber security attack corrupted all the data and there are no recent backups. Then incident management and the next one. So under the Data Protection Act, one of the areas you must have is every organization is required to have a data breach response plan. So whenever there is a data breach, the incident, what are you going to be doing? Who are you going to be reporting to? How do you know it's a data breach? It's not an incident. So you must have a proper articulated steps to respond to the data breach, and the incident reporting breach and escalation processes. And then you must have a post-incident review and improvements, right? Third-party vendor management. So as we already alluded to earlier, that you are invariably, no matter what the size of your organization, you are going to be sharing personal data with other organizations, right? So you must make sure that when you share personal data, these personal data, you carry out due diligence on them. So, for example, are they registered with the commissioner's office? How long what are the sort of security measures they have in place? Are their employees trained to handle personal data? Is it role-based data training? And there's a whole host of other requirements or vetting you can do before you onboard them as your vendors or as your supplier. Then you also implement data processing agreements in place with security clauses, have regular audits and assessment to check their compliance. The next one is what are they one of the key areas, who are they compliant with the relevant data protection laws? This is a key legal requirement for data security. There have been many organizations who share personal data, or they are not even aware that they need to register with the commissioner's office. If you are running an organization, one of the key areas is registration with the Office of Data Protection Commissioner. If you're not registered, that is a compliance issue. And just for your, if you are running an organization, just for your purposes, you need to know that if you have a turnover of Kenya shillings 5 million, or you have 10 employees, you must register with the commissioner's office. And then there are certain industries, certain sectors who must register with the commissioner's office, irrespective of their turnover or the number of employees. So, for example, if you are in the finance, if you're running a financial industry, or you're running a property management firm, or you're running a healthcare, or you're running a the taxi application, or for example, your Ubers, you must register with the commissioner's office. And you must then continue to demonstrate compliance to documentation and audits. Yeah, that actually now brings me to an end of this short presentation. I hope you found it useful. I know we have another 10-15 minutes left in this webinar. I would like to use that for purposes of Q&A. And thank you for attending, and I hope you found it useful.
Thank you very much, Amit. I hope everyone on the call has been able to learn one or two strategies they can use to protect their personal and organizational data. So we'll use these few minutes for Q&A. If you have a question to Amit, you can raise your hand or type it on the chat box. So I'll start with some of the questions that I have seen. Someone is asking, Doris is asking, does death cause one to cease being a data subject?
Good question. Doreen, in our Kenya Data Protection Act, just to give a little bit of history, the Kenya Data Protection Act is borrowed a lot from the General Data Protection Regulation, right? So what in under the General Data Protection Regulation of Europe, it says the Data Protection Act, the regulation only applies to living persons. However, our Kenya Data Protection Act is actually silent on whether it's applicable just to living persons or to deceased as well. So whenever you are doing your compliances, you can actually take also into account that yes, data protection could even apply to the deceased to be on the safe side. We wait to we remains it remains to be seen what is going to be eventually the guidelines. But generally speaking, it applies to living persons. But then you can even assume that yes, when somebody dies, there is still a possibility that they could still be considered as a data subject.
Thank you, Amit. I hope, Doris, that has answered your question, and everyone else on the call. I can see there's another question from Gashugu. He says, is a data processor or controller supposed to meet all the lawful basis for processing personal data?
No. So here is fairly straightforward. You need, when you start processing personal data, you must identify a lawful basis which is applicable. Right? So for example, if you are going to be saying that you are an employee of my organization, then you must then identify what personal data you're going to be processing, the categories of personal data, and then you identify the lawful basis. So in which normally that employer-employer relationship is a contract. But remember that you must also communicate to that employee via your privacy notice or your privacy policy that what lawful basis you're going to be using for processing. And remember also that if you then the lawful basis ceases, if you feel that that is not the correct lawful basis for processing, then you cannot change the lawful basis. and at a later stage. So it is very important to identify the lawful basis initially and make sure it's the correct one. Can you use multiple lawful bases? Yes. So, for example, you can use uh, consent and contract and legal obligation at the same time, but you have to justify why you're using two or three lawful bases. So let's go again back to the example of the employer and employee. If you enter into an employer-employment agreement, the lawful basis is contract. If you need to give your employers, the employees' lawful details to an organizer, sorry, to government authority, because you say KRA, NHIF, and SSF, the lawful basis is legal obligation. But then at the same time, for any incident, you also need to share the employees' details, say, to health authorities. Say, for example, there was an outbreak of COVID, where you needed to share if somebody has been contracted COVID, you need to probably give the health authorities the details. That is legitimate interest, right, of the organization as well as the employee. So yes, just to answer your question straight, you don't need to meet all the lawful bases, but then you can decide which lawful basis, and then you need to justify why. Okay.
Thank you for that, Amit. I can see there's another question around deceased relatives or deceased people. Brian is asking, can a relative or survivor of a deceased person request a company or entity to delete that person's data?
So first of all, that's a good question. You can, but remember one thing is you don't read the data protection laws in isolation. You must read it together with other laws which are applicable. So in that case, you can ask the company or the entity, yes, but then they will probably ask you, let us know what authority do you have under the Succession Act to act on behalf of the deceased. In which case, you may need to get probate letters of administration to act on behalf of the deceased. Yeah. Now, one thing is, of course, this is all, I'm just giving you very generic answers. This is not legal advice by any means. So please, it all depends on case to case basis. But this is generally what happens. You need to read the Succession Act vis-a-vis what is also under the Data Protection Act.
Great. I can see another question, but this one is for people who like going to public spaces. They're asking
Yes.
how do you treat images or photos taken in public places? So, for instance, attend a company event. Is that company or they organize an event? Do they have to seek permission from attendees to share pictures and other information on social media, or is it implied that by virtue of attendance, you've automatically allowed them to share the images?
But now we are getting a bit technical. So let me ask you the same question. Whoever asked that question is when you are going into any event, whether there's attending a church or is the attending a event of a company or attending a Christmas party or a wedding, do you expect photography? Do you expect to be photographed? Yeah. Is it reasonable for them to take photographs?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. And then let me ask the second question. Is it reasonable for them to even put that on them on social media? Do you think it's reasonable? Do you think it's reasonable for them to put your photograph on social media? Joy, specifically your photograph.
Yes, for the purposes of the event I've attended. By me being
For the
there,
event I've attended.
yes.
Yes. But if they put your photo, but then is it reasonable for them to use that for commercial purposes? It's
No.
not, is
Yes.
it?
Yes.
So the long and the short question is that if you take photo, you go to an event, and if those photographs are taken, that will be for company's internal purposes. But the moment you use that for commercial purposes, and there's the meaning of commercial purposes is very broad, right? Then it is protected by, then they need the consent of the individual, right? And then, I mean, now I don't want to get too technical. As I said, this is not legal advice. It depends how many people are photographed, right? So, for example, if you have Joy, Bernard, Sarah, and Amit who went, and then they were having a drink, they were laughing, and then the photograph was taken. Who was identified in that photograph? Who was targeted for purposes of that photograph? Depends on what angle it was taken the photograph from, right?
Yes.
So can you genuinely say that it was Joy's photographs which was there for commercial marketing? Can you say 100%? You
No.
can't. So, these things are very technical, but the long and the short is that if I take Joy's photograph at an event, I put it on social media, I say Joy attended, she's one of our best employees, they are marketing themselves, they need Joy's consent. Yes, I'll leave it at that at the moment. These things are very technical. Yeah. Okay. Next question.
Yeah, there's a question around the course. The course, for those who joined a bit late, we have a
Yes.
certified data protection program with Amit. I'll share registration link on the chat box. The class begins on March 3rd. So there's someone asking, once they do the program, is the certificate recognized locally? So that's yes. And can you use it to land local jobs? That's another yes. And they're also asking, what do you think is the future of data protection as a career?
In 2 words, very bright.
Very, very bright. I hope you had that, Steve. And then I
Yeah.
think
But remember one thing, that you got to be passionate about data protection as a career, right? You really, really got to be passionate about it. It is not as simple as just doing a certificate and then going out there. You have to keep on learning. Yeah, and you must make sure to be on top of your game, and because things are rapidly changing. And and in future webinars, we are also going to be touching on artificial intelligence and data protection. That is also one area where you can use your skills. Okay. So yeah.
okay. I can see another question from Moses. Moses is asking, are M-Pesa agents required to register as data processors?
So I think that's a good question. If you meet the requirements for registration, if you have a turnover of Kenya shillings 5 million as an M-Pesa agent, or you have 10 employees, you need to register. It's as simple as that. Okay. But depends if you need to register as processors or controllers. If you're an M-Pesa agent, you have also other employees. You may be a data controller as well, and you may need to register.
Nice. I can see a very good question from Gashugu here. He's asking, does the DPA have a provision to register DPOs the same way we have data processors and data controllers registered with the Office of Data Protection or DPC?
Not yet. The DPA does not have a provision at the moment for registration, but then it depends on the guidelines which the ODPC, that's the Office of Data Protection Commissioner, may come up with in future, but they may amend the law saying all DPOs must register. There are certain countries globally, I think in somewhere in Europe, where DPOs must register. I think it's Ireland. Ireland, the data protection officers are required to register with the supervisory authorities.
Okay. I can also see another question from Walter. He's asking, what is the data protection framework for places which ask for ID cards at the reception so that you can enter their premises? I think
So
there's
good
a
question, Walter. I will often get this question. So remember one thing is that there is an act of law, but for security purposes, they must reasonably identify you, right? When you are entering a reception office building or wherever. they must identify you. However, the practice at the moment is that there is a lot of data which is being collected, which is disproportionate and excessive. So by leaving your, sometimes I even seen when I go to office blocks and I'm at the parking on those barriers, that Askari just comes to me and throws that big book on my lap and says, Andika, right? And I say, what do you mean to Andika? And then on there, I can see everybody's phone numbers, names, who they have come to visit, and and this has been a case even recently. It's like whereby an individual went to office block, and then he went to see another lady who was working somewhere. I think it was a personal visit. And then after a week or so, even the wife of that man visited the same office block. He found the name of her husband there visiting a certain lady, and then it caused a lot of issues, right? So, yeah, I don't want to go into some of these things at the moment, but one thing is remember what you need to know is that office blocks are required to identify you. They're required to get your for security purposes, but then that information does not have to be excessive. And this issue of having this big book on office block thrown on your lap, no, that is absolute no. Okay.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question. I think we are running. We are already over time, so I think we'll take two more questions and then we can take it
Yes.
from there.
Yeah. Two more
Yeah.
questions. Let me see. There's someone who's asked a very complex question here. Explain the concept of
Yes.
data sovereignty and its implication for organizations handling international data.
Okay. Where is the question? Let me see over here.
John Brown.
Data sovereignty. Write down. Okay. Okay. First of all, when you talk about international data transfers, it is again a very complex topic. I'm not going to go through it at the moment. But if you're an organization, you're going to be transferring personal data outside of Kenya. One, you need to have what you call appropriate safeguards in place. What are appropriate safeguards are depends on case to case. So, for example, if you are going to be transferring to a jurisdiction outside of Kenya, first and foremost, you must understand that are you processing your lawful basis properly within Kenya first? So, as I say, charity begins at home. You must satisfy yourself that there is data protection compliance with in your jurisdiction. One, two. When you are transferring it, obviously, you're going to be transferring it to an entity. That means you must make sure that that entity, how is it safeguarding the personal data you are sending to them? Because remember, they will either be your processors or you might be controllers in a joint controller relationship. So do they have are they registered if they require registration? Do they have their vetting processes? Do they have these how are they keeping their data secure? Do they have their policies, for example, the data protection policy, privacy notice? So have you done your due diligence and vetting? Okay, and then after that you can transfer the personal data. However, there are certain sets of personal data which must not be transferred outside of Kenya. So for example, when you talk about sensitive personal data, these are biometrics, say for example, like biometric data, health data, children's data, they cannot be transferred outside of Kenya unless you have the consent of those individuals, so sensitive personal data. And then there is data of strategic national interest. So these are, for example, data to do with elections, population. These are mainly national data which are of national strategic interest. They also cannot be transferred outside of Kenya, right? And yeah, so I mean, it's a very complex topic. This is actually a discussion for another one whole webinar, which we'll do it hopefully in the future. Yeah.
Great. So maybe one more. Someone is asking, for you to be a DPO, do you need to have a legal background? And which professional body in Kenya is available for DPOs?
Well, there is no bar to becoming a DPO, right? It is again a misconception that you need a legal background, right? A lot of the techies I know, they are also DPOs. In fact, some of the largest companies globally, right? So, like I know, I don't know now, but I think some time back, the data protection officer for Airbnb had a degree in music, right? So you don't need to be a DPO. You can even have a maths or a science background. But what is important is that you go to be have the passion for what you're doing, and also you go to be have willingness to learn in a very fast moving space. Um, which professional bodies in Kenya are available for DPOs? Currently, there is no professional body as such, and which has been. But then there are societies. So, for example, there is the Data Governance Society, which I am also a member of, and then there are certain other groups. There are certain other groups which you can join, and you will learn a lot from there as well. But there is no professional body at the moment which actually certifies you that you are a professional DPO.
Okay. I can see one more question, but I'm not quite sure if we have the bandwidth for it. So
We can
Steve,
take it, not an issue. Yeah.
Steve is asking if he gets a CIP or if he gets certified in CIPP or E, can he land remote jobs? And what advice would you advise getting an IAAP or PECB certificate?
Well, I mean, look, as I said, this data practice package is very new. CIPP is just one of them. There are others which are offered even by some universities, for example, Maastricht University. There are others offered by some other organizations. So CIPP is just one of them. CIPP would probably give you an added advantage, whether it lands you a remote job or not. That's another matter altogether. But of course, getting certified would really help, right? To further your career. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Amit. Thank you so much for answering all the questions that our learners have presented to us and also taking us through the session. So as a takeaway, I think for our learners, Amit mentioned this, that charity begins at home. You need to learn how to be compliant at home before you start exploring external or international waters. So having said that, if you'd like to learn more in class with Amit, please join our data protection course that is beginning on March 3rd. You will get to have live sessions like the one we've had every Thursday for the next 4 weeks from when you join the class. So we'll be sharing the materials of this webinar on your emails. And if you'd like to learn more again with Amit, just sign up for the program. It is worthwhile. I'm sure you've enjoyed. So thank you again for joining, and I wish you a lovely evening.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Guys, you can feel free to drop off.